Hello, future paralegals, and welcome to our webinar presentation. This is Pretty Paralegal, and today we are talking about the #1 secret to the P1 licensing exam and how to increase your chances of passing. My name is Naomi Joy. I am your licensed Pretty Paralegal host for today. And how about we just dive right in and get started? So the #1 secret to the P1 licensing exam is that it takes more than just your knowledge of law to pass. So you're probably thinking, how on earth is that possible? Is this not a law exam? Well, here's the thing, it actually isn't a law exam per se. See, when you were in school and you completed a course, you were then given an exam to test how well you understood the legal principles that you were taught in that particular course. So you've already satisfied the Law Society by passing and completing school that you understand the law that you were taught. What the Law Society is looking to do now is to test whether you are ready to be a paralegal, which involves more than just understanding the law. Because see, the thing is, how you apply the law is going to depend on a certain number of factors. So how about I just explain? But first, I'm going to start with a story, okay? This is me back when I was a student, just like you. It wasn't that long ago. Not only was I a good student, I was an A+ student. I fast-tracked my career by working with licensees before I even finished school. I had an incredible practicum experience where my field placement was with an entertainment lawyer who taught me a lot. And it was very exciting because it was an area of law I was very interested in. I graduated at the top of my class. In fact, I was the class valedictorian. So that meant that I had graduated with honors. I was nominated to speak for the graduating class. I even got them standing up and singing "I Believe I Can Fly" by R. Kelly. I gotta say though, I am rethinking that choice, but that's a separate discussion for a separate time. After graduating, the law firm gave me the keys to their offices because it was expected that I would then prepare for the licensing exam, and once I passed, I would go on to represent clients during upcoming trials. The thing is, when I went to write the licensing exam, it didn't go so well for me. I was horribly sick. In fact, the first half of the exam went terribly. I couldn't concentrate. I had to go to the bathroom. I was throwing up. The proctors and first aid were trying to convince me to go home, but I just felt that I had worked so hard to be there. I had studied. I knew the law. I knew I was supposed to pass. And I did everything that I could, but ultimately in the end, I did not pass. So you're probably wondering, what on earth happened? Well, let's talk about that. See, what happened was that I got to the exam and discovered that there was so much more to it than I thought. It was nothing like I had anticipated per se. It's a very challenging 7-hour exam. And right now we are dealing with COVID-19. So for the students who are participating in this presentation, you're going to be writing it online. So you're not going to have to spend 7 hours like I did, but you're still going to be dealing with the same challenges. Ultimately, after completing after the first half of the exam was over, in the second half of the exam, I decided to take a break from my materials and to just read, because I knew at that point that there was no way I was going to pass since I didn't finish the first half. So I just decided to read. I was reading and answering and just really paying attention to what was being asked of me, and I had a major aha moment. I realized what it was that the exam was actually doing. So once that day ended, I decided to go back home, start from scratch, get back to the drawing board and devise a new strategy. Plus, when you don't pass the licensing exam, the Law Society will send you results so that you can see how you did in relation to the group average in each area of law. And when I refer to area of law, I mean the areas as organized in your materials. So that's professional responsibility, which includes advocacy and practice management, jurisdiction and fundamentals, civil litigation, criminal and quasi-criminal law, administrative law, etc. So you can, I could see how I performed as compared to the group average, and I was only a few percentage points below the group average in each area, and it's really only because I didn't finish. And it taught me a lot, and now having worked with students for a few years and going through the licensing process over and over and over again with my students that I work with, it has become very clear to me now what it is that the licensing exam is actually achieving, or what its main objective is when testing paralegal candidates to become licensed paralegals. Like I said, there is more to the licensing exam than just your knowledge of law, and I'm going to tell you exactly what. There are 5 ways that the licensing exam will test you. First, the licensing exam will be testing your analytical reasoning skills. Second, it will challenge and test your ability to decipher relevant versus irrelevant facts. Third, it will challenge and test your logical thinking skills. Fourth, the licensing exam will be testing your resourcefulness. And lastly, the licensing exam will be testing your ability to manage your time while under pressure. It's a mouthful, isn't it? It's a lot. Think you can handle it? Well, let's break it down a little bit further so that you can understand how these 5 tests actually work and what you need to do to prepare to crush it, to succeed and to overcome these 5 objectives. So first, let's talk about your analytical reasoning skills. Now, what is analytical reasoning? Now, analytical reasoning means your ability to consider a group of facts and rules, and then to determine what could or must be true based on those facts and rules, or based on any necessary and sufficient conditions, okay? Usually they will appear in sets of questions on the exam that are based on a single passage. That's how the exam will structure many of their questions to test your analytical reasoning skills. Okay, so during the exam, when you get those fact-based case scenarios, you're going to see sometimes really long paragraphs which will give you a situation, and we'll get into that in a moment. It'll give you a situation with a lot of information, and then what will follow will be a series of questions. It's important that you understand that those questions that follow the passage may not necessarily be related, or may present different or conflicting conditions from other questions. The point is that each question is a standalone challenge, okay, in relation to that paragraph or passage. So what you need to do in order to succeed in the exam and to develop your analytical reasoning skills is you need to be able to determine what it is that you are being asked to do. And that might sound silly to some of you, but I can tell you after working with students for several years that one of the reasons why students don't pass or get in or select incorrect answers is because they didn't really understand the question. So you need to learn how to determine what it is that you are being asked to do. Secondly, you need to be able to determine the applicable area of law. That's another reason why many students get incorrect answers. They misunderstood which area of law applied. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You also need to be able to determine which information is relevant and which information is not relevant. All of these things that you need to do apply to the question, not the case scenario, which is another big mistake that students make. They might consider intuitively what it is that they're being asked to do, the applicable area of law, and what information they need to know, but they're not always consciously thinking about asking these questions in their minds about the specific question. So, when I invited you to participate in this presentation, I also invited you to purchase our exam readiness assessment. It's only $12.97, and its purpose is not necessarily just to be an opportunity for you to practice writing the exam. That's not its purpose. Its purpose is to see if you are actually ready to pass the exam, or if it would benefit you to receive some exam prep coaching through one of our programs. And only you will know that based on your results, and after you participate in this presentation, you'll have a better idea of whether you think it would serve you to enroll in one of our programs, or if you're actually ready to proceed. So I want to make reference to one of the questions in our exam readiness assessment. It's question number 11. So refer back to that when you get a chance. Okay, so let's go through this. Question 11 says, you have been retained by Gina, the defendant in a breach of contract claim in small claims court. Andy, the plaintiff, is unrepresented. He approaches you outside the courthouse and asks whether you can just clarify how the proceedings are going to unfold. As Gina's paralegal, you must do each of the following except A, make it clear to Andy that you only represent Gina's interests. B, urge Andy to obtain independent legal representation. C, seek an adjournment so that Andy can obtain independent legal representation. Or D, advise Andy that you do not protect his interests. So, when I reviewed the responses that students have submitted over the past year when given this question, 60% of the students who answered this question answered it incorrectly. They got the wrong answer. So let's figure out why that is. Remember, you are being tested on your analytical reasoning skills. So here's how you can overcome the challenge. First, determine what it is that you're being asked to do. Okay? Now, it might seem simple and straightforward to you because it's just saying, okay, it's Gina's paralegal, you must do each of the following except. The thing is, I find that these except questions tend to confuse students. They forget that it's there, and when you are given an exception, you have to rephrase the question to be very clear about what it is that they're asking you to do. So what often happens is that students, they'll say, okay, they'll read the part that says, as Gina's paralegal, you must do each of the following, and they stop there. It's like their brains just shut off, and they stop there, and they think, okay, what do I have to do? Make it clear to Andy that I only represent Gina's interests? Yeah, I got to do that. Urge Andy to obtain independent legal representation? Sure, yeah. And what ends up happening, and I found this going through this particular question with students, is that they end up thinking that this is a case of all the answers being right and one being more right, but they've ignored the fact that it says you must do all of them except for one thing. What they're asking you to do is find the one thing that you must not do or that you do not need to do. That's what the question is actually asking you to do. So to help increase your performance analytically your analytical reasoning when answering these questions, it really helps to identify the specific question in the paragraph and then rephrase it. Ask yourself, what is it that they're asking me to do? And then rephrase it. Okay, so next you need to determine the applicable area of law. Now, this is another spot that really throws students off because case scenarios like this one tend to have more than one area or indicate the possibility of more than one area. For example, in this paragraph, we see words like small claims. For students, that might make them think that the area of law that applies is civil litigation. But then they see this part of the paragraph which says, you've been retained by Gina. And they're thinking, okay, professional responsibility. Then we have language here that says it involves a breach of contract claim. Okay, so then does that mean it's jurisdiction and fundamentals? And then we see that Andy is the plaintiff and he's unrepresented, which sounds both like civil litigation and professional responsibility. So which area of law is it? What applies? Well, the way you're going to be able to answer that question is by determining which area of law applies not generally, but to the question that is being specifically asked of you. That question is, as Gina's paralegal, you must do each of the following except. So they're asking you to determine what you can do and what you can't do as Gina's representative when an unrepresented party is asking you for advice. That's really what it's about, which would then make the applicable area of law that of professional responsibility. Okay? So you're probably thinking, when are we going to get to the actual answer? Well, the answer is coming up. Okay? First, let's talk about the third thing that you need to do in order to overcome and improve your analytical reasoning. It actually has to do with the second way that the exam is going to be testing you. So let's just move on to that. So the second test is your ability to decipher relevant versus irrelevant facts. Okay. When you are a licensed paralegal and a client comes to meet with you for the first time, they're going to tell you their story. And their story is going to be very emotional potentially. They're going to give you everything that they're thinking about, everything that they're feeling, and it is up to you to take all that information they give you and ask the question, well, does it apply? Is what the client saying relevant to the actual legal issue? In fact, you have to determine from their story what the legal issue actually is, because sometimes what the client thinks is the issue is not the legal issue. So you've got to ask, of the information that's being given to me, is any of it relevant? Is this piece of information applicable? Does this or that information apply? You have to ask the question. It's not your client's job to determine that for you. It's your job to determine that for them. So how does this apply on the exam? During the exam, as I said, you're going to receive fact-based case scenarios with information that is relevant and even more information that is not relevant to test your readiness to be a paralegal. The exam will trick you a little bit because it's going to pepper the paragraphs with information that may not necessarily be relevant to the specific question that they're being asked. Or you might get a series of questions where a piece of information is not relevant, but it is relevant to another question. You understand? It's going to be up to you to be able to decode that during the exam, because that is what you have to do when you become a licensed paralegal. Now, it's important that you understand that a fact is only relevant if it relates to, applies to, or is bearing upon the matter in hand. For the purposes of the exam, the matter in hand or the matter at hand is whatever it is you're being asked to do. The matter at hand isn't the whole scenario. It's what you're being asked to answer, okay? Every fact that is legally relevant is also logically relevant. But a logically relevant fact isn't necessarily legally relevant. In other words, just because something happened or is true based on what information is given in the case scenario does not make it relevant, okay? This is a very important lesson for you to understand right now, because you're going to need to have a strong ability to ignore irrelevant information, and it starts with the licensing exam. So let's go back to that case scenario, question 11 from the exam readiness assessment. Okay, so you're being asked, as Gina's paralegal, all but one of the answer options are things you must do, but we are being asked to identify which is the thing we should not do. Okay? Or it's not that we shouldn't do it, but it's not necessary for us to do it, okay? So let's determine what information is relevant. So you have been retained by Gina. That is absolutely relevant, okay? Andy, the plaintiff, is unrepresented. That is also relevant. Those are the two most relevant pieces of information in this paragraph. And yet, we've been given a pretty large paragraph with a bunch of information that has absolutely no relevance to the question. For example, it's irrelevant whether the matter is in small claims or not. Whether the matter is in small claims or the Human Rights Tribunal or the Landlord Tenant Board, either way, if we are representing Gina, we cannot advise Andy. It is irrelevant whether Gina is the defendant, plaintiff, applicant, respondent, because the point is, what is relevant is that we have been retained by her. So regardless of which party she is, our duty flows to her and not to Andy. Okay? It is irrelevant why they are in small claims court. So in the case scenario, it says that they're there for a breach of contract claim. That is completely irrelevant to the question. It doesn't matter because we are not being asked about their issues. We are being asked what of all the things that we can do, which one is not something we must do if Andy, an unrepresented person, is asking us for advice. That's what this is about. It's irrelevant why they are in court. Okay? So the correct answer is C. As Gina's paralegal, we must do each of the following except seek an adjournment so that Andy can obtain independent legal representation. Why is that? Because Andy's not our client. We have no duty to assist him. It's not up to us to seek an adjournment for him so that he can get representation. If he wants to adjourn, then he can make that request. It is not up to us to do that for him. We cannot give him any advice or speak on his behalf. Okay? Now, I want to remind you a fact is only relevant if it relates to, applies to, or is bearing upon the matter in hand. Every fact that is legally relevant is also logically relevant. But a logically relevant fact isn't necessarily legally relevant. So like I said, it might be relevant if the question were different, that they are in small claims court. It might be relevant that it's a breach of contract claim if the question was asking us about the claim, but because we weren't being asked those sort of questions, that if those pieces of information in the case scenario are not relevant. And during the exam, when you are given a case-based or fact-based case scenario like this, if a stated fact in the scenario is not relevant to the specific question that you're being asked or issue that you're being asked to address, okay, then it doesn't matter. You need to ignore those statements of fact, okay, and move on. Let's move on to the third way that the exam is going to test and challenge you. But before we do, I want to tell you a little story. So I want you to meet Glenda. Glenda is a friend of mine, and she was a former student who did her practicum with me and a further internship. And for Glenda, becoming a paralegal was a big deal. Getting through school and becoming licensed was a big step for her. She had made a lot of sacrifices to get there, just like many of you have. She spent her entire life savings to pay for school, and she stopped working. And anyway, she completed the program. She did her placement with me, and then she began to prepare for the licensing exam. And she had purchased a few practice tests, but she kept failing every practice test, and she began to feel very discouraged. She couldn't understand why it was that she was failing when she did pretty well in school. And I explained to Glenda that the reason she was not succeeding was because she was simply doing a law review with one of her teachers at school, which was not what she needed. She didn't need another review of everything she just spent the last year to 2 years learning. What she needed were strategies to know how to pass a test. So that's when I created the 8 Steps to Success program, where I devised an 8-rule strategy that teaches students how to get to the correct answer in each licensing exam question within 2 minutes or under 2 minutes without needing to use the materials, because more often than not, the questions are a lot easier to answer. The answers are literally right in front of you. And I have an 8-rule strategy to help students answer questions quickly and correctly, and to complete the exam to increase their chances of passing. The thing is that the 8 rules only works when a student understands the 5 tests that we are speaking about today, which form the number 1 secret. And I had to try and explain that to her, and at first she really had a hard time accepting that it takes more than her knowledge of law to pass. So I needed to find a way to demonstrate it to her. That's where my beautiful daughter comes in. I want you to meet Cece. She is my gorgeous daughter, but back then she was a little girl who happened to be around while I was coaching Glenda. The way I explained the 8 rules to Glenda was that I wanted her to think of it as a game where, in order to win, she needed to follow the rules of the game. And if she followed the rules in step by step as strategies as I have taught her, then she will pass. My daughter overheard that conversation, and she said, "Hey, I want to play this game." And I thought, you know what? This could be a very interesting experiment. So I invited Cece to join us, and I explained the 8 rules and each step that they needed to take before selecting their answer. Now, most students that I've taught this strategy to, and that I continue to teach this strategy to, usually get to the correct answer by the 3rd step or the 4th step. And it's a very good strategy, and I taught it to both Glenda and to Cece, and then I gave them a series of 10 questions and asked them to answer each question based on the rules that I had given. Now, it's important that you remember, she was just a little girl back then. She didn't know anything about law other than, what I shared with her that I had learned previously when I was in school. She didn't study law. But when we completed the challenge, Cece got an 8 out of 10 correct, and Glenda only got 6 out of 10. How is that possible? Well, when I asked Glenda to explain why she chose the answers she chose, she had a long story where she injected all of this context that just didn't even apply. None of that information was given, but she let her mind overthink things and kind of get it away from the point. And when I asked Cece why she chose the answer options she chose. She said, well, Mom, based on the rules you gave, these were the most logical answers. She was 12 years old, guys, 12 years old. And she said, I picked these answers because it's just logical, which leads me to the third test. The exam is going to be testing your logical thinking skills. So let's break down what is involved with that. So logical thinking calls for structure and relationships between facts. It calls for chains of reasoning that make sense based on those relationships and facts, okay? So again, let's go back to the readiness assessment. Question number 7 is a really good example of how the exam will determine whether you have strong logical thinking skills. It asks, the whole purpose of a pleading, be it a statement of claim, complaint, defense, response, or reply, is to. Now, before I break down the answer options, remember, you need to ask yourself what it is that you are being asked to do. Because when you do that, you rephrase the question to make sure you really understood it. So what are they asking us to do here? They're asking us to define the purpose of pleadings, okay? So the purpose of a pleading is to A, prove that the defendant is guilty of the damages caused to the plaintiff. Now, right away, the word guilty should stand out to you. Why? Because guilty or guilt is a word that we only use in criminal law. Now, pleadings will apply in both criminal and civil situations, okay? Or in both civil litigation and in criminal litigation, okay? The reason I'm highlighting this is because in this answer option, we have the word guilty, and then we have damages caused to the plaintiff. You should immediately recognize that there is a conflict here. You cannot combine criminal concepts and civil concepts. It's either civil or criminal. The fact that it is written this way should be a clue to you that answer option A cannot be the right answer. Logically, it does not make sense because you would never prove that a plaintiff, that a defendant is guilty of damages caused to a plaintiff. You can only prove that a defendant is liable for damages caused to a plaintiff. So that cannot be the right answer. Okay? That's you applying your basic logic skills. Next, the answer option B. The whole purpose of a pleading is to prove the defendant is guilty of the damages caused to the plaintiff on a balance of probabilities. This is the exact same situation as situation A. We have the defendant is guilty, damages to the plaintiff, which is an immediate conflict because one deals with criminal and one deals with civil. Then you add balance of probabilities, which is the standard of proof in a civil dispute, not in a criminal dispute. So again, on logic alone, knowing these simple legal doctrines, you should be able to identify the fact that these are conflicting. Plus, then there's the word prove. You do not prove guilt in pleadings. You can only prove guilt once you have had a trial and have proven the guilty mind and the guilty act based on evidence, okay? The pleadings only state the facts, okay? So again, conflicts. Logically, as trained paralegals, you should immediately recognize that this cannot be the correct answer by how it's written. But it does throw off a lot of students because it's very wordy, it seems very precise, and students tend to pick the wrong answer. But it is not correct. Okay, then there's answer option C and answer option D, which are very similar. So let's read them. The whole purpose of a pleading, be it a statement of claim, complaint, defense, response, or reply, is to C, define the issues between the parties, to confine the evidence of the trial to the matters relevant to those issues, and to ensure that the trial may proceed to judgment without either party being taken at a disadvantage by the introduction of matters not fairly to be ascertained from the pleadings. It's a mouthful. Answer option D is very similar, except there is one main difference. I wonder if you can spot it. Now, when you have answer options like this, you really need to break it down line by line. So, define the issues between the parties, to confine the evidence, okay? We go through the next line. How does it compare to the second line C? Right? You got to do a comparison and figure out what is the difference between the two answer options, because they both sound the same, but they are not the same. The difference is that answer option D uses a further qualifying language. So answer option D is saying the purpose of a pleading is to define the issues between the parties, to confine the evidence of the trial to the matters relevant to those issues, and to ensure that the trial may proceed to judgment beyond a reasonable doubt without either party being taken at a disadvantage, etc. You should immediately recognize that this is problematic, because the question is asking us to define the purpose of a pleading not just in a criminal context, but in a civil context as well. And pleadings could be statements of claim. It could also be a defense. It could be a complaint. It could be a response. But beyond a reasonable doubt is a standard for proving guilt, not a standard for presenting or pleading your case to the court. So you should then recognize by logic alone that answer option D cannot be correct because of that language, and that the correct answer is C. This is how you logically work through an exam question and answer options without needing to use your materials. But a lot of students have been given this question, and I have found that many of them get confused and they immediately turn to the materials, and before you know it, 5 minutes have passed and they've lost time when the answer was staring straight in their face, and all they had to do was just stop and look at things logically. Okay? Now, logical thinking skills, you all have it. You apply it every day. But it is something that you will have to practice in order to succeed on the exam. In the PrettyParalegal How to Pass P1 Licensing Exam Prep Program, we actually cover that. So it involves in-class group coaching and law review, except the law review isn't your typical review. We're not just reviewing the law generally speaking. Instead, I am providing students with cheat sheets to know how to apply the law to the specific situation and how to logically determine answers based on what they do know of the law. Okay, kind of like I just demonstrated. We go over legal terminology. So in the last example, we highlighted words like beyond a reasonable doubt and things like that. So we do a deep dive into the legal terminology so that you really understand the spirit of it, and that you understand some Latin terms, because they often do come up on the exam and you really need to know what they mean. But I also provide the cheat sheets as a quick reference guide. You'll also have cheat sheets for acronyms and the Delani method indexing system for some students, which I will discuss in the program, and a cheat sheet to help you identify clue words, like I just pointed out, words like guilt, balance probabilities, liability. All of those words speak to specific areas of law. And if you can spot those clues by applying your logic, then it helps to support your analytical reasoning skills during the exam. Okay? Now let's move on to the fourth test. The fourth way that the exam is going to test you is in your resourcefulness. So what do I mean by that? I mean your licensing exam study materials. Now, you don't need to know all of the answers perfectly. You do not need to have a perfect knowledge of law. You just need to know where to find the answers. It's called legal research, guys. That's why you have a legal research class in school. Not even judges know all of the laws of the land. So in actual practice, this holds true. You do not need to have perfect knowledge of law in actual practice. You just need to know where to find the law, how to read statutes and decode them, how to find cases where judges have made decisions which become binding precedents upon certain courts, okay? So the exam is actually testing your ability to do that in a unique, controlled situation. And that is why it's an open book test, so that you can actually search for the answers. But a word of caution, your LSO study materials are part of the test, guys. So don't be fooled into thinking, okay, you're gonna have an easier time because it's an open book test. You only have less than 2 minutes to answer each question if you intend to finish the exam. Do not rely on the materials for every question. That would be a big mistake because you will lose time. You can answer many of the questions without ever opening your materials. To learn how to do that, you may sign up for one of my How to Pass P1 licensing exam prep programs, and I will teach you exactly how you can do that. Okay? And actually, by the end of this presentation, if you make it all the way to the end, I will present you with a special offer so that you may take advantage of these exam prep programs that Pretty Paralegal offers to students just like you. Now we're going to move on to the fifth and final way that the licensing exam will be testing you, and that is time management under pressure. Okay, so this is actually a big part of what I teach in the How to Pass P1 licensing exam prep program, as well as in the Inner Circle program. And before I continue, in the How to Pass program, students will be invited to complete, or required actually to complete, a student archetype self-assessment. And the reason why is because after working with paralegal candidates for a few years now, I've discovered that there are 5 key paralegal archetypes. These are paralegal student archetypes, I should clarify, meaning they're sort of like personality types, which I've discovered each student falls into. Every student falls into at least one of these archetypes. And how I discovered this was just by working with students, observing them, observing their challenges, and figuring out why it was that they did well, why it was that they felt challenged. And I also recognized that I personally am a combination of all 5. Guilty as charged. And I learned a lot from that when I failed the licensing exam the first time, because I realized that these personality traits within myself actually had weaknesses that caused me to fail. But they also have strengths which are very valuable in actual practice and can be valuable in the exam if you learn how to harness the strengths that come with each student archetype. So When you enroll in the How to Pass program, you'll be able to take the student archetype self-assessment to determine what your archetype is and steps you can take to increase your chances of passing and increase your chances of succeeding with these 5 secret ways that the exam is testing you based on your archetype. Okay, so let's get back to the 5th test, time management under pressure. Now, generally speaking, I find that the 5 different archetypes handle stress very differently, but there are 2 common ways that people tend to deal with the stress that is associated with the licensing exam. They're either the easy breezy, taking your time sort of person, where they're not feeling the stress. They're like, hey, I've got 7 hours, or in your case, I've got 4 hours. You know, it's gonna be fun. I'm just gonna focus and get through it. But before you know it, the clock's ticking down to your last 15 minutes and you spent so much time in your materials reading that you ran out of time. Then there's the student who is the high anxiety, stressed out kind of person, where they're feeling the pressure with the clock ticking right in front of them, and it's overwhelming and it sort of causes them to fumble. So I'm not sure what kind of person you are, but it will be important for you to figure that out, to figure out, how do I deal with stress? How effective am I at managing my time while under pressure? So it is important that you understand that everything we do as paralegals is subject to a limitation period. And the licensing exam is recreating that for you. The number one reason that students didn't pass was because they didn't finish the exam. So it's going to be very important that you are able to demonstrate your ability to take decisive action during the exam, and to not aim for perfection, but to aim for progress. You just need to get it done. That's it, right? You need to remember that this isn't a real life situation where a client is sitting in front of you and you have some time to process all of it. You are in a test, you are in an exam, and you have less than 2 minutes to answer each question. You need to get through it like hustle, 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 okay? Now, in the How to Pass P1 licensing exam prep programs, we will teach you how to do that. And it will make such a difference for you so that you can actually finish the exam not only in time, but finish each section of the exam early enough that you have some time left over to review questions you were unsure of and want to verify. And remember, just stick with us. By the end of this presentation, you will be given a special offer so that you may enroll in one of our licensing exam prep programs and increase your chances of passing. So that's pretty much it, guys. That is the number one secret to the P1 licensing exam. So let's just do a quick recap to make sure that you remember what the number one secret is. So, are you ready? We're gonna do a recap. The number one secret to the P1 licensing exam is that it takes more than your knowledge of law to pass. The exam will challenge you in 5 ways, and those ways are: first, your analytical reasoning skills; second, your ability to decipher relevant versus irrelevant facts; third, your logical thinking skills will be challenged; fourth, your resourcefulness will be challenged. And remember, the materials form part of the test, and it's important that you learn how to use the materials efficiently while also not relying on them too much. And last, the exam will be testing your ability to manage time under pressure. Now, let's talk about the How to Pass P1 licensing exam prep programs offered by PrettyParalegal. So let's break these down to help you understand exactly what is included. The first course is called Tips and Tricks. It's 2 hours of online self-study. They are taught in visual video tutorials. So the first tip that you're going to learn is mind over matter mindset. That involves the way you need to think about the exam, what sort of mindset you need to develop going in, and certain strategies that have been scientifically proven to help increase performance. We're going to teach you how to do that specifically to pass this test, okay? In tip 2, you're going to learn secret study strategies, and I'll give you a heads up right now. The first secret study strategy is to not study. That sounds totally crazy, right? But we provide you with other secret ways to actually be more effective in your review period, and to learn what those tools are, those secret study strategies. You will need to enroll in this program. Tip 3 will teach you how to reorganize the materials the Pretty Paralegal way. So right now you will have received a 720-page study guide from the Law Society, and it's overwhelming for most students because the question that many students have is, how do you know where to find information? So I've just taught you that you don't necessarily need to know all of the information perfectly, you just need to know where to find it. Well, it's very challenging to do when you've got a thick 720-page document in front of you, and other documents that you may want to rely on. Well, we teach you the best way to organize the materials, in our opinion, and how to effectively use them to get to answers quickly. Tip 4 will teach you a color coding system, again, to help you find answers quickly in the materials if you have to rely on the materials. And tip 5 will further elaborate on the clue word strategy to increase your logical thinking skills and help you to answer questions quickly and correctly. The second course in the 8 Steps to Success program is called 8 Steps to Success. It's 4 hours of online self-study learning in video tutorials, which will actually demonstrate a step-by-step 8-rule strategy for how to answer each exam question correctly and in under 2 minutes. Now, in the How to Pass program, the only difference is that it also includes the Tips and Tricks course, the 8 Steps to Success course, live in-class law review. So that's 20 hours of online learning in a group setting where you meet weekly for live law review classes. And remember, these aren't just ordinary law review classes. We're not here to teach you what you already just spent the last year to 2 years learning. Instead, we teach you how to take your understanding of the law and apply it to different case scenarios. We also complete the archetype self-assessment to determine what your strengths and weaknesses are going into the exam, so that you know what you need to work on to increase your chances of success. Plus, they have direct access to me, and they can text me or call me at any time if they have any questions, if they're confused. Sometimes students will text or call me in the middle of the night when they're having a panic attack, and I am there to hold their hand through the whole process. We also provide downloadable cheat sheets, and every week we do a demonstration where we apply these principles to different fact-based scenarios together and answer questions. Now, the cost of this program is $9.97, but I don't want you to be worried about the price. I know that many of you are probably thinking, oh my goodness, how can I afford that? I just spent thousands of dollars to finish school. And we understand that for sure. So since you've made it all the way to the end of this presentation, we want to give you a special offer because we know that you're serious about succeeding. Otherwise, you would not have made it this far. So for participating in this free webinar presentation, we are offering to you the opportunity to enroll and access all of these courses and all of these tools for only $697. You get everything. The value of this program is actually $2,000 or more when you consider that students will have direct access to their Pretty Paralegal coach 24/7 during the licensing process. Plus, you will also be eligible for 70% off all Pretty Paralegal CPD courses within your first year as a licensed paralegal. And you'll also just have direct access in case you need support, and you will need that support. It's very important to have a mentor when launching this career because it is not an easy career to pursue, but Pretty Paralegal is here to help you. All you have to do to take advantage of this offer is to visit our website and enroll, and it will ask you for a coupon code, and the coupon code you're going to provide is this. So write it down. You're not going to see it anywhere else besides here in this presentation. So make sure you write this down because you're only going to get one chance to get it right. And all you need to do is visit PrettyParalegal.com, go to the For P1 Students button, and you click that. It will take you to the P1 licensing exam prep page, and select enroll in P1 exam prep programs, and it will direct you to our Pretty Paralegal pupillage where you may learn more about our programs here in this section. See, for paralegal students, and then you click here to enroll in how to pass P1 licensing exam prep programs. So that is it for now, my friends. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar presentation. I hope that you found it to be informative. If you have any questions, please do email me at info@prettyparalegal.com. So again, the email address is info@prettyparalegal.com, and in the subject heading, please write #1 secret follow-up, and I will know that you are sending an email to me in response to this presentation, and we can set up a call to answer any questions that you have and to figure out how we can get you enrolled in one of these programs to increase your chances of passing. Thanks again. I believe in you guys. You're going to do great. See you soon.